Eric, one of those words that just gets thrown around way too much in the fitness industry is functional. Like, what does it mean to be functional? And many people might say, like, oh, you gotta like squat, you're standing up, sitting down. Deadlift, you're picking something up. Bench press, you're lifting a homie over off your chest. Like, I get it. We've all been there. But what is more functional than hurling an object, a physical object, at your enemy with intent to kill them? And that is why we have someone, Kyle, on to talk about the Highland Games, the most functional. If by function we mean it actually has an intent and a purpose behind it that has a high utility. The Highland Games might be historically the most functional of sports.
And technically, that aspect of functional training has quite literally defeated bodybuilding. If you haven't heard of David and Goliath, the functional aspect of learning how to throw something and killing someone who's clearly just trained for size to their own detriment and not for function, it has spiritual fact that bodybuilding is going to leave you dead in front of a sling wielding small person. With that said, though, Kyle isn't a small person, so he's like David and Goliath all wrapped into one super soldier, So I was pretty happy with everything we learned from Kyle today.
No, Eric, he's like if Goliath ate David and absorbed his throwing powers. And that is because
chopped off his head with a Highlander sword and took his powers.
Whoa, where'd you get that sword, Eric?
Oh, this sword? You mean this one that I won at the Team Nevada Championships, INBA 2011? You know where I got this sword because you were supposedly there. Again, another evidence of your lies.
So the tears were streaming down my eyes, and so everything was so blurry, and my contacts just couldn't handle it. But Eric has his sword, and that makes sense because the Highland Games, people will hear it and they might think, oh, that's like, once again, cosplay for strength athletes. But not only is there a rich history that literally goes back thousands of years in some form or another, throwing things, but it also targets and talks about something that we've been sort of dancing around for a while when it comes to iron culture, and that is there are many different ways to lift, and there are many different definitions of what it means to be a strength athlete. Where I think in our worldview of what has become more popular, of course, the squat, bench, deadlift, we joke because we're in group, we love this shit, but people will tend to think, oh, big three, like what would you need to do besides the big three? And then you have, once again, this just gargantuan man coming aboard. You have Kyle here competing in the Highland Games. It's like, you mean to tell me that's not badass? That's not athletic? To me, actually, if we're evaluating people just from almost that like reptilian evolutionary standpoint of like, oh, that's dangerous. It's like you see someone move like Kyle, like 6'4", 350 with power. So there's a speed component where he could sprint, he could run fast, he could throw things fast. That's dangerous in my eyes, right? A powerlifter that's gonna, pass out walking up a flight of stairs, I'm taking that sucker out 10 times out of 10. Someone that can actually sprint faster than me, weighs literally 2 of me, and is insanely strong and athletic and has a kinesthetic sense of awareness where they can move around in a 3D plane. That's a dangerous human.
Absolutely. This is a guy who had to make excuses for why he only deadlifts 650. Talking about his strength and how, I don't train for it. And, you could tell he was embarrassed by deadlifting more than 99% of strength athletes ever will. So it's an awesome discussion. Kyle's got a really unique resume. He is someone who is a junior college world champion in, that's not a thing. Junior college champion in the throws. He is currently Division I throws coach at Sacramento State University. He is a 2 times amateur world champion in the Highland Games and recently turned pro. And he placed 3rd in the Pleasanton Highland Games, which is one of the arguably one of the bigger Highland Games competitions, especially in California. And he was set to go to professional world championships this year. Unfortunately, as we all know, the zombie apocalypse is upon us, so that had to not happen. But as a consolation prize, he got to be on Alan Thrall's channel, which is at least as good. And then as a close second, coming on Iron Culture today to tell us not only about Highland Games, its history, the competition format, his history in it, but also throwing. And I think we did a really good job of covering, both those disciplines of iron sport.
Eric, you nailed it. And I would say, once again, for those that might think they read the title and they might listen to the intro, like, oh, Highland Games, like, it's not squat, bench, deadlift. man, just give it a listen because I think it's palpable hearing the enthusiasm that Cal has for the sport. And as greater accessibility happens, we've seen this happen when it comes to powerlifting, where, deadlift platforms, as we're saying, just bars that don't suck at commercial gyms, that's become a thing. I think the accessibility will be huge in the future to allow people to participate in this. And I do see that happening, just like there's a lot of strongman implements kind of entering maybe CrossFit gyms or maybe some commercial gyms. I see it happening. So just stay on the lookout, stay tuned, and remember, David, Goliath, or both. Goliath.
Perfect.
It has been said that the Highland Games is really just hipster strongman. And I think we have the perfect guest today, Kyle, to dispel that rumor. And I would actually put forth, Eric, that the Highland Games is really it's cosplay for strength athletes. Okay, you got to dress up, you got to wear a kilt. We could talk about, we don't do LARPing here, live action role play. Kyle, we're just gonna let you know we're familiar, Eric. We're vaguely, would you say vaguely familiar? We have a peripheral understanding of that cosplay world. What would you say, bro?
I would say that I'm distinctly aware of the lower caste of the role-playing hierarchy as a tabletop role player of who is definitely below me, the LARPers. Okay. So, but aware and kind of a disdainful, but aware that there always has to be a bottom rung of society type of aware. Yeah,
we define ourselves by what we're not and what's lower than us. So with that being said, I would put forth that the Highland Games is kind of like cosplay for strength boys, where it's like, hey, got to put on a kilt, got to do some cool shit. Look, I think we would be awesome. Kyle, here's my application. You don't need to know our numbers, but I like to drink and I like to get in fights. So can I be part of the Highland Games?
I mean, that's like 85% of the game. So, I think right away you're going to be a pro, like, without question.
I just want to say efficiency is always something we appreciate here at Iron Culture. And the fact that we covered 85% of what's important for your sport in the first 3 minutes gives us, at least an hour and a half to cover the last 15%, which, the tangential stuff for the people who really want to become truly good. So I don't know about you, Omar, but I'm pretty impressed with us.
I'm impressed with Kyle. I'm impressed with how we defined ourselves via negative. I will say, to take a serious turn, and we were just talking about this off air, but I think this is going to be a very cool episode because the specificity boys that define strength being a skill or as a movement, just essentially 3, squat, bench, deadlift, and they think, oh, like, what are your numbers? If you don't have those numbers, then I have no sense of understanding your athletic potential, your value in terms of being an athlete. And Kyle, you compete in the Highland Games, but I know just a little bit about strongman, okay, the strong boys. And I saw at a Lone Thrall, a little known YouTuber. Honestly, we like to shout him out because we believe in supporting small channels that deserve more exposure. But you beasted a 200 kilogram. Myself and Eric have done, once again, a little bit of strongman. We've done the stones. A 440-pound stone, the second ever person at untamed strength to do it. And if that's not an indication that this is a strong lad, for those that are trying to have some sort of equation like, yeah, but how much do you squat? It's like, okay, son, it's not just, all about the squat. I think it's going to be a very interesting conversation, Eric, because there's that athletic component, the explosiveness, where we define power, which has strength and a speed component, which is very fascinating. Powerlifting's kind of, we call powerlifting a low velocity sport. So we're expanding what it means, I think, by bringing people on, having, top studs like Kyle on, what it means to be athletic or what it means to be fit or what it means to lift, so to speak. Because I think too much in our narrow space, we define lifting almost exclusively by the big 3 and maybe, the snatch and the clean and jerk a little bit,
No, I don't disagree. And so for those who haven't figured it out yet from the intro that we've yet to record and what we've been saying for the last few minutes and us insisting on not letting our guests speak very much at all, we're going to be talking about Highland Games, but we're going to actually allow you to listen to and hear from someone who knows about it more than Omar and I, although we know 85% of it as we covered. So Kyle, if you could please introduce yourself to the Iron Cult. Let us know a little bit about yourself as a strength athlete, as a power athlete, may I even put forth. And just thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Highland Games is kind of a little niche sport, so it's nice to get that broader exposure for it. Little intro about me. I'm also a track and field coach at Sacramento State University, where I coach the throws, shot put, discus, hammer, javelin. my background obviously is in throwing. I was a shot put hammer thrower for Arizona State. I also went to junior college for the throws and was a junior college national champion in the shot put. So I've been throwing since I was 14. So rolling into the Highland Games, which is kind of where Highland Games or where throwing originated, was kind of like the natural progression. Is really funny, as a track athlete, you kind of look at the Highland Games as like, oh, like just like you said, those are weirdos kind of dressing up in skirts and throwing rocks and grass, and that's kind of the way I looked at it too until I was introduced to it and was like, oh my god, this is even better. The atmosphere is better. The events, there's a lot broader events than just like shot put, hammered. You get to test all kinds of different strength skills. But yeah, I think everyone who's into strength sports in general should give it a try at least. Go out, register for a local games as a novice, and just go throw some things in the field. Why not?
Absolutely. So I've seen some some competitions. I remember again, as a tabletop role player, I'm heavily involved in the fantasy community. So going to the Ren Fair, for those who don't know, that's the Renaissance Fair, dressing up, but not to do live action role play, just in spiritas, in support of the era that we pay homage to as role-playing game artists. I added artists on there for prestige. We sometimes watch people do like Highland Games, that's sometimes included, or if we go to like the Scottish festival the Scottish Rites Festival, they have a big one, I think, in Sacramento that my mom likes to go to every once in a while, and she invited me. I've seen live some Highland Games competitions, and I thought, man, that looks really cool. And so that's my only live exposure. But what got me really interested in it was I watched the Rogue Fitness documentary that Jan Todd and some others did called Stoneland. I'm assuming you've seen it by your nods. So how did they do? Did they do a good job with that? Did that movie resonate with you?
Oh, it's fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Especially, they got to cover a lot of things in Scotland. I have actually had a chance to go over to Scotland. I competed in a few games last year, and I've also done some of their, natural stone lifting that was like the predecessor to the Atlas stones. So I didn't get to do all of them. That was kind of a regret that I had going over there for 2 weeks and not doing, all the big ones. But I do plan to go back again and do all the big stones, try the Denny stones, the Inver stone, all the big name ones that I didn't get a chance to do when I was over there last year.
That would be amazing. And I think sometime in 2050, when we have developed, superhuman variants of ourselves that can handle COVID, or a virtual reality system where a robot who you're controlling from afar with the same strength qualities as you lifts the stones and you see it in VR. So, I mean, we're a few more months and we're only 29 years away from that. So I think I would
actually be all over the robot idea, all over it.
I mean, I honestly got pretty excited as I was talking about it. I would love to do robot strength athlete wars. That would be amazing. And man, I think I have an idea for our next episode. But anyway, very cool. I think that's really good perspective. And I imagine that most of our audience probably only has this kind of murky awareness of what Highland Games is. So I think a great place to start, Omar, unless you want to cover anything else, is, Kyle, if you could help us understand the structure, the events, the progressions for an athlete, where you go to compete, and basically like the stuff that if someone came up to you at an Untamed Strength and you were resting between sets, which we know all strength athletes, that's about 25 minutes. So you had a brief discussion with them over that rest period of, hey, here's what you need to know if you're interested and want to get into it.
Yeah. First things first is there's games all over the place. It's not, specific to country. I've heard of games, down in Chile and in Canada and all over the place. So, primarily me being in the States, almost, I can't say every state, but almost every state has like their local games. And honestly, it's as easy as just signing up. If you search on Facebook or Mostly Facebook, some little bit of Instagram. There's usually training groups in these little areas that are associated with the games, and you can get in and practice there if you want. The problem, or not problem, but the hard part about training for the games is all the different events and the different implements that aren't a typical implement. You can train with a shot put, which kind of mimics the stone because that's where the shot put came from, was the stone throw. But the weight for distance, that's not something you can just go on everythingtrackandfield.com and buy, or the actual hammers that the Scots throw, or a caber. Cabers, I don't even have a caber. So training it for it can be a little difficult, especially by yourself. But to start with on what the events are, like I said, first you have the stone put. The first one's called the Braemar stone, which is for men, it's a 22-pound stone that you that you throw from a standing position. Then you have the open stone, which is a 16-pound stone, which is where the shot put came from. That's why the shot put is 16 pounds. And you do the same as a shot put. You can glide, you can spin, you can stand there and throw it, whatever you want to do. Then you have the weights for distance. The heavy weight for distance is 56 pounds. The lightweight is 28. And you throw it, if you've ever seen the discus, it's kind of like the discus. So you're actually throwing a 56-pound weight with one arm, which is, to me, when I first saw it, was insane. I was like, coming from track and field, I'm like, man, a discus weighs like 4 pounds. So it's a big difference. And then you get to the Scottish hammer. And, if you've seen the Olympic hammer, it's, a ball and a wire. This one's actually like on a rigid pole. Usually it's like PVC pipe or a rattan handle. So it's, rigid. You don't have the handle. You kind of just hold onto the pole. And you wind it over your head and you throw. There's no turning your body involved like there is with the Olympic hammer. Then there's the big one that everybody knows is the caber. That's the big telephone pole that you have to, throw and turn over. A lot of people think, is it for distance or height or however you want to throw it. It's actually for accuracy. So when you flip it, you want it to land directly in front of you. And we call that, it's judged on like a clock face, so we call that a 12 o'clock score. And that's a perfect score. That's as good as you can get. And then if it doesn't flip, you get a degree score. So if, it comes up here, you get like a 45 degrees. Any turn is better than any degree score. So if you get, even if it comes up and it falls, straight to the side and you get a 3 o'clock, that's better than a 89% degree. But that's the hardest, like I said, that's the hardest one to train. That one you kind of have to go to games and experience on your own. Then you have, in the U.S., we have a really popular one called the sheaf toss. And it's a burlap sack filled with twine. It weighs about 20 pounds. And you stick a pitchfork through it. And you try and throw the bag up over a bar. It's kind of like weight for height, but with a bag and a pitchfork. And then you do have weight for height, which is a very, very common, strongman event. So those are the events. The sheaf is primarily a U.S. Event. Canada does it a lot too, but if you go over to Scotland where it originated, they look at us like we're dumb. So, but it's a crowd favorite in the U.S. just because you can easily see what's good or what's bad. If you don't know anything about throwing, the difference between a 50-foot throw and a 65-foot throw is very minimal. You can't really tell, especially if you're not right up on the trig. But if a bag goes over a bar, hey, they did good. Mm-hmm. So it's a very, very popular one in the U.S. and I think it's going to end up being taken over to other parts of the world as well.
Very cool. So as a competitor, when did you get into Highland Games? How far have you gone in it, and how far can one go, and what does the organizational structure look like? Can you, as most strength athletes and bodybuilders want to do, quote unquote, turn pro? And then what does that mean? Are there different organizations? I come from the highly legitimized sport of natural bodybuilding, where we're trying to hit that triple-digit number of federations. We think that's what's going to bring us that legitimacy. Once we have 100 natural bodybuilding federations, then we can say, hey, we've made it. And we're about halfway there, so working on it still.
Yeah, the games itself. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. So I actually originated as a thrower in college. Like I said, I graduated. I was still trying to throw the Olympic hammer to qualify for the 2016 Olympic trials. I was nowhere near good enough to make Olympics, but I was really trying to get that last spot in trials. And I met a guy when I was living in Maine. I was coaching at a small Division III school, and I was trying to throw. And I met another coach who was at a school by the name of Will Barron, who was a professional in the Highland Games. Saw me throwing, and asked if I had ever done it, if I wanted to give it a try. And like I said earlier, I was kind of like, that's dumb. I don't want to go do that. Well, come to find out, I'm not even good enough to make the trials. So I called him back and I was like, hey, I'd love to go give it a shot. I just want to have some fun. My last few meets were not very fun at all. So I just want to have some fun throwing things I like throwing. So I went to his house. I had one day of practice. I broke half of his implements. It was a great day. Showed up to my first games and just kind of, immersed myself in it. I had to borrow one of his kilts because I didn't have one. I had no idea where to get one. Went and through, and I did really well. I won the amateur class for that games. It got me into some other local amateur games in the area, and I just kind of took off running from there. I stopped throwing Olympic hammer. I stopped throwing anything other than Highland Games events, and I put all my focus into the Highland Games just because it was primarily because it was fun. I really enjoyed the atmosphere, the people. I like throwing things, and that's what kind of steamrolled into becoming a professional. There is a couple different layers you can get to in the Highland Games. You have, your novice class. You have a few different layers of amateur, A, B, and C. A is your top level. It's all skill based, and then yes, you can actually be a professional in the Highland Games. So that's what happened with me. I spent 2.5 years in the amateur rankings, and I went from my very first games. I was ranked 16th in the amateurs in the U.S., and then the next year I was ranked third, and then the year after that, I was first and was pretty much unbeatable at the amateur rankings. I won 2 amateur world championships in that time, and was able to turn pro halfway through my third amateur season, kind of by fluke. The Pleasanton Highland Games in Northern California is one of the biggest Highland Games in the world. I'd competed there as an amateur, and I'd planned on competing there as an amateur again. And the games director, called me, I think like a month or two before Pleasanton, and said, "Hey, we had a spot, or we had someone drop off, and we have an open spot. Would you like to come up and compete with the pros?" And I, dove full into that, and I was like, "Heck yeah, I'm going anyway. Might as well get paid to go." So it was a little bit scary because there is no, federation like you talked about. Every games is its own separate entity. So you have to kind of, as an amateur, your path to pro is kind of travel to all these games, get to know games directors, make sure they like you, make sure you're not being an ass. And, then once you decide to go pro, hopefully you get invites. Because you can't just show up as a pro, you have to be invited to these specific games. So I felt I had done that, but I didn't think I had done it enough because everyone else I had talked to was, you got to spend 4 or 5 years as an amateur and go all over the country and, introduce yourself, and which is true, but I kind of lucked out in that like my numbers were so high right off the bat, and there's a few people that have done that in the past too. That one, I was able to have the numbers to get invited pretty quickly, and then I try to be a nice guy most of the time. So I was able to get that late invite, and then I did really well. I took third place at the Pleasanton Games, which is, a lot of people, if it's not a world championship that year, it's considered one of the championships in the U.S. for sure. So, making my pro debut at the Pleasanton Highland Games and taking third, kind of, made my mark in the pro class, and the invites started to roll in from there, which was really nice. So ever since then, that was a couple years ago. This would have been my third year as a professional, and I would have loved to have this year. This year was actually the first year I got an invite to the World Championship at the professional level. So I was really bummed that this year wasn't able to happen, but hopefully next year I can keep those numbers going and try and fight for a world championship.
That is awesome. And it's also very interesting. And I think it speaks to, it's difficult for me to say that this is a young sport, because obviously there's a rich history behind it. But I can tell from an organizational perspective, it's definitely a niche sport, as you described it. Omar, you've talked about this before, that when you have a relatively small tribe, quote unquote, that being inclusive, friendly, and bringing people in is such a huge part of it. And I think if you remember, we juxtaposed the beginning of CrossFit, and we had our CrossFit episode, to where it has now gone. And in the beginnings of CrossFit, there were no CrossFit athletes. There were athletes who got introduced into CrossFit and then became champions. But now people start at a reasonably young age, since CrossFit's been around for more than a decade now, training for CrossFit, which I think is very interesting. So yeah, I think it's interesting, Omar, that there are probably not a whole lot of people who start training for Highland Games. Most of them come from somewhere else, like throwing.
Yeah, I was going to say real quick, guys, that from an outside standpoint, I agree first with what Eric is saying about it being a niche, and thus you have to be inclusive. Like, hell yeah, man! You want to wear a kilt? I got a kilt. You need a spare? Here you go. You want to take a beer? Let's go. Let's do this. Is that the biggest barrier to people actually getting into Highland Games? Because you got everything. You got the rich, storied history. Okay, thousands of years, right? Where apparently they say it goes back 1,000 years, but it could also even predate Christianity with the Gauls. Like, just doing some of these things. Fun fact, you spoke about, Kyle, some of the shot put stuff. We want to talk functional fitness. If we want to talk the total warfare that's occurred over the last several thousand years, I'll give you one example right now. The Second Punic War, the Balearic slingers off of the Balearic Islands, throwing was actually integral when it came to combat. The skirmishers, it was one of the most prized things someone that can do. And the first troops that were sent out were always the skirmishers, and either the slingers or the hoplites, if with the Greeks, whatever you have, like the spears. So this was actually used since time immemorial. Deadlifts, not that functional, bro. Throwing something at someone else, hell yeah. So you got the rich storied history. It seems like a great time. It's very inclusive. And I was thinking about this, like when it comes to strongman too, because, it depends upon what you want. Some people want that spectator experience where it's almost like an art gallery where everyone's kind of silent. You're watching it, weightlifting, there's that respect for the tradition. I understand that. Powerlifting, it depends on what federation where you're going. Some are more boisterous than others. But strongman, it certainly seems with Highland Games, it kind of has a festival atmosphere. So that's a huge positive, right? And who doesn't want to throw? I did just the barest in university, throwing things. It's a lot of fun. So I think the innate thing you're doing is fun. I think the barrier, Eric, I've been thinking about it, is just accessibility, right? Where what you said, Kyle, real quick, which bums me out, and that hopefully this won't be such a thing, is that with Strongman, there's now gyms having some of the implements. But if you want to do it, it's like, how does one start recreating that? And so that really is that barrier. Once you eliminate that, kind of like we have commercial gyms now, big box chains have deadlift platforms, Alico plates. They didn't have that 8 years ago. So now everyone's kind of doing powerlifting. And you think some of these niche sports, so-called, they might not be niche for that much longer. So when I hear all these things, that's why we're joking at the start, Kyle, just to circle back. We're like, yeah, it kind of sounds like silly. I'm like, no, it sounds badass. Like, you got to dress up. You got to, it's a party kind of atmosphere. It's dynamic. So I think that idea, either improvisation or dynamic, there's new inputs coming in at you where you have these events, but who's going to show up, right? It's small, so you don't know. Like, you have some idea, but powerlifting, it's like, okay, I know these are the big dogs. I'm competing here. I'm likely to total within 3 to 4% of what I'm projecting, as long as something doesn't go bad. It's not like I'm going to overperform. So it has all these novel factors. So no, I heard what you said. I'm intrigued. I think to tie it back to everyone listening and just give them that rope, Can you talk? Because you're, I've seen the Instagram, Kyle. You're a behemoth of an individual. Can you give some of the, like squat, bench, dead numbers? Because it's kind of like someone wants to play, a rock musician wants to play jazz, and they're like, oh, okay, you said C7, like what's going on here? And you're like, yeah, just add a B on the one chord of the C. Like, oh, okay. It's like just give them a little rope, bro, in terms of some of the lifts. So we said the 440-pound stone, which is a huge lift. I've seen the squats. Just give the stats: height, weight, and then some of the core lifts then before we go on.
Yeah, I'm 6'4", 345 pounds. I've been all the way up to 365 pounds, trying to lean down to like 330. My squat, I actually just maxed a squat, I think it was a couple months ago, and I hit 700 in reps and a belt.
Yep.
And bench, I hit 475, hips off the bench, because as throwers, we really don't care. And then deadlift has always been my weakest event. I actually haven't even started training deadlift until probably about a year and a half ago. But I hit 650 in deadlift.
Yeah. And then I think tying it, Kyle, to what you actually do and you being a throw coach, can you talk then about some of the key components? So we have, for some people, some of the core lifts. Do they transfer over? We're going to ask you that question to the actual throws in the Highland Games. But what are some of the key qualities then for someone either looking to get in or looking to excel? Where can you almost look at someone, Kyle, and be like, that's going to be a good throw? Like we look, like Eric and myself, we look at someone, their morphology is like, okay, so we got long limbs right here, long arms, short legs. This boy's about to deadlift a ton. We could kind of just tell. What are some of the key qualities then when it comes to being an effective thrower?
Yeah, it's kind of the same thing. I mean, the crazy thing about throwing is it's not all about strength. So there's some guys that are a lot, I'm a lot stronger than, or they're a lot smaller than me, that can outthrow me in certain things. And it happens all the time. There's a professional by the name of Scott Farr who used to compete as a lightweight athlete. And now he's a professional competing at like 210 pounds. And he's, keeping up with all the guys that are, my weight or my height. So there's not always something, but, like you said, long arms, tall always helps. I was always at a kind of a disadvantage with the throws. I mean, I'm tall, I'm 6'4", but I've got a 6'1" wingspan and tiny hands. So technically I've got short arms for the throws. I've got small hands for the throws. So, there's things you can definitely look at. Just general athleticism, being able to move in space. If, a lot of power lifters are very, linear, they like to move up and down, and they don't have a lot of body awareness. So, being aware of your body and being able to move in space is probably the most important part. And because that's what you see when a lot of guys come from powerlifting into Highland Games, is they're great at the weight over bar. They might be decent at the caber right away because, they've got the power. But when it comes to those moving events, they have no idea what to do. And it takes them a long time to learn that skill. Because I had a background in throwing, I developed that body awareness when I was 14 and had been building it from the time I was 14 till the time I graduated college. So when I jumped into Highland Games, I did have an advantage to, anyone coming from powerlifting, or strongman's a little better because they do move in space a little bit. So you'll see a lot of strongman that transfer over pretty well. But so far, if you look at like the top probably 10 guys in the world, majority of them came from a throwing background, just because they have that awareness in space. So like I said, it's not always size, it's just general athleticism and how you can feel your body when you're moving.
That makes a lot of sense to me. And if anyone's ever watched the hammer throw or shot put or discus, especially at the high levels, man, trying to think about rotating your body as fast as you can, generating that rotational force, and then still accurately throwing it at the right point and not stepping over the line or tripping on the block that's supposed to contain you into that small circle. It's always incredibly impressive to me. I have the fortune, the privilege, I would say, of the place where I train is also where the high performance sport athletes train in New Zealand. So the weightlifting gym that I train at, I got to train alongside a number of not only Olympic weightlifters, and I do mean Olympic weightlifters who actually have competed in the Olympics, but as well, there's a group of throwers, and watching them warm up and the drills they do and the amount of force they can produce and the amount of power they can produce is really cool. Like, Valerie Adams is someone I've met a number of times, and you know who that is, Kyle.
Oh yeah.
So, and it's just so incredible to me to see big people move like that. And I came from powerlifting first, got into weightlifting, and then got exposed to strongman and throwing once I came to New Zealand. So my visual bias of when I see big people is, oh, you're going to be a strong super, but like, no one sits around and thinks like some of the supers in powerlifting are athletic. They think they're incredibly strong, don't get me wrong, and they're an athlete in their sport. And then I got into weightlifting and I was like, oh, wow, you're really quick, but it's still a very constrained motor pattern. It's up and then down real fast, and having timing and rhythm. But when you see a really big man or woman move through the rotational aspects of throwing, it is just an incredible sight to see. So I think I would love to hear more about some of the coaching that you do as a throws coach, and how do you help athletes develop some of those skills? And I'm sure it's a very different process than what most weightlifters or powerlifters would expect.
Yeah, and to touch on kind of what you said, I mean, right now in New Zealand, you guys have Tom Walsh, who's one of the best shot putters of all time, not just right now, but of all time. And I mean, if he's wearing regular clothes and you're standing there looking at him, you're like, he's an average dude. He's a big guy, but he looks like an average dude. But when he gets in the ring, he's so fast and so aware of his body that, he can throw that thing 74 feet, which only, less than 5 to 6 people have done that ever. So, if he's training there, I wish that I had trained there just to watch. But I have gotten a chance to also be around a lot of those high level athletes. Ryan Whiting, who's a 2-time world champion in the shot put, he was an Arizona State athlete. He wasn't there when I got there. He had graduated a couple years before, but he had come back from time to time, and we would have practice groups where Ryan Whiting would be out there. My teammate was Jordan Clark. He was a 5-time NCAA champion in the shot put. He was also an Ryan was an NCAA champion in this case, but Jordan was a 5-time NCAA champion in the shot put, and we were teammates for 2 years, and then he trained professionally at ASU the whole time I was there. So I got to, during practice, got to pick his brain a lot and kind of see what he does and how he prepares. And I think, I might not have been the best athlete. I never won an NCAA championship, but I did get to, pick the brain of some of the most elite people. Also, teammates of mine, we had Chelsea Casulo, who was a hammer national champion, Anna Gelmini, who was a discus national champion, Maggie Ewan, who's probably going to go down as one of the best collegiate throwers of all time, not just shot putter, not just female thrower, just one of the best collegiate throwers of all time. We were teammates for a little bit too. So I've had the chance to work with a lot of people in my time at ASU that definitely helped prepare me to be a coach more than it prepared me to be an athlete. Working with kids has been, I say kids, but they're all adults. I don't work with kids, but working with throwers has really changed the way that I look at throwing. I was a thrower, and when I was a thrower in college, I looked at it as, just be as fast and as powerful and angry as you can. Whenever I stepped in the ring, I tried to be the Hulk every time. So now I look at it in a more methodical kind of sense, and how, the biomechanics of it, kind of help take place there more than just your strength and aggression. I'm lucky enough that I got a job at a Division I university where I get to kind of pick, the top level kids to try and bring into my program. So a lot of them have the base. I just do, little tweaks here and there. Some people come in with a bigger base than others. So some people come in and, you make one little tweak and, they're off to the races. And then some kids, it takes, 2 or 3 years of working with them. But, I really enjoy, sitting kids down in front of, a video of them or a video of a professional, whoever they, might admire, and we watch the way that these other people do things, watch the way they do things, and try and find a specific way that each individual thrower can mold themselves into the best thrower that they can be. A lot of coaches, they sit there and they think like there's one way to throw. A lot of people, a great example is Randy Barnes, who holds the world record in the shot put. It's like, well, he holds the world record, his way's got to be the way, right? No, not everybody is 6'4" and can sprint faster than a lot of college sprinters. So plus there's no drugs now, but but being able to sit and like kind of make a plan for each individual athlete, that's really what has really turned me on to continuing my career as a coach. Early on, it was just, but get in and go faster. Like, get your leg out faster. Why aren't you doing that? Like, I don't get it.
Yes.
But over the years, I've had to learn that, and I think now is when I'm really starting to come into my own as a coach because of that.
Absolutely. And I think, in my experience, the belief that most people have, especially even athletes, is that if I'm a good athlete, I'll be a good coach because I know what it takes. But what I've actually found is that you need to have been an athlete, but how good you were has very little correlation with how good of a coach you are. But very interestingly, in my experience, and something I've noticed over time, is that athletes who become coaches, who stay athletes, they typically become better athletes. They have the second wind. And I think once you put yourselves in the shoes of a coach, you get around a lot of your cognitive biases and beliefs that you can keep about yourself. I think you naturally fall into, as a reasonably successful athlete even, kind of a one-size-fits-all metric because you know intimately well what worked for you and how to go around the limitations you had. But once you become a coach, you start to realize that there are other limitations. You start to learn the unknown unknowns. Like you didn't know what you didn't know as an athlete when you had one little minor view. But a coach gets to take each one of those athletes and get a view on the bigger picture, and they develop a larger repertoire of ways to improve performance and considerations and potential downsides. So I know for myself, one of the best things I could have done as a bodybuilder and strength athlete was to become a coach. And I went from being a mediocre athlete to slightly above average. So, I mean, if that isn't a ringing endorsement, I don't know what is. But, yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, a perfect example of that is, me personally. I was lucky enough to work with, one of the best coaches in NCAA history, Dave Dumble, and he taught me a ton. Don't get me wrong. He taught me, half of everything I know when it comes to throwing. But in the years that, it took developing, my coaching strategies, I started to look at the throws differently. And an example was last year, one of my athletes, he wanted me to throw, and I hadn't thrown the hammer since I hung up for Highland Games, which would have been 3 or 4 years ago now, and I hadn't touched it. And so he wanted me to throw in this meet with him, and I was like, okay, I did. And I took 1 week of I wouldn't call it training. It was going out and taking 5 throws and saying, oh, I suck at this now. But I jumped into the meet, and because I was able to think about the throw differently, I was actually relatively close to what my collegiate PR was at that meet, just because I wasn't trying to throw it like I threw in college. I was trying to think of it the way that I thought of it now. And not saying I'm going to start throwing hammer again, but it was just kind of a realization of, okay, the things that I'm thinking about now, they work. And I'm on the right path of understanding, the way the throw works.
Absolutely. That's really interesting. And I would like to, this is off topic, but it's something I was thinking about, and I don't want to lose that trail. I want to circle back to Highland Games and some of its organizational structure. Now, obviously, like we talked about, there's a very rich history going back as far as Omar was talking about, potentially 4-digit number of years or longer, an excellent way to hit on the history aspects of iron culture. Given that, I know some institutions that have been around a long time are slow to move. But this is an interesting aspect where it's a sport kind of all brought under the broad umbrella of strength sport. And as strongman is becoming very popular, and strong woman is now becoming very popular as well, as CrossFit became very popular. I know it's a little bit in canceled status now, but overall, the arc of CrossFit is on the rise. And therefore, as well, powerlifting and weightlifting. Has there been, I wouldn't say pressures, but has there been movements towards more organization or better connectivity or changes to the organizational structure in Highland Games in the last few years since you've been involved?
Since I've been involved, it's kind of shut down. There was a movement probably 5 to 10 years ago to try and bring things under one umbrella. And there was a lot of pushback because of the rich history of it. There's a lot of people that have been running a games or a part of a games for 10, 15, 20, 30 years, and they didn't want to change. They didn't want to bring, standardized equipment or, a standardized ranking system. There are ranking systems, but it's all, it's up to a games to even put it in. If this games doesn't agree that there should be a ranking system, then all your numbers from that game didn't go in that system. So the pushback is definitely from the older generations that continue to run it, not wanting to change the way that it's run right now. Scotland's done kind of a standardization of it. They have the SHGA, but even there, not all games are under the SHGA. The SHGA doesn't really run much. They're kind of just the blanket umbrella for. They do a little bit of testing. They do a championship at the end of the year. So that's where it all goes. But overall, there's still no, federation or anything like that. A guy by the name of Francis Brebner, who was a professional in the 90s, he was one of the best in the world. He held a couple world records, along with Ryan Vieira, who was also one of the best ever to compete in the Highland Games. They tried to start what was called the IHGF, and the IHGF was doing some things on the professional level, but again, nobody wanted to fully commit to it. So it kind of fell off on the professional side, and it still does things on the amateur side. And they do awesome things. I was able to go over to Norway. This was my first time ever leaving the country. I went over to Norway to compete in the IHGF Amateur World Championship. So they still do some things, and there's maybe 10 games on the year that they claim to be part of the IHGF series, but it's still an individual basis. Gotcha.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, and I understand there's also pros and cons here. We've talked about this. There are meme joking videos about the difference between the IPF and the USPA and the USAPL to where, and if you speak to kind of old guard in powerlifting, they loved when there was hey, it's just a bunch of folks who get together on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and they alternate between DE and ME days, and that homegrown kind of down-to-earth grassroots movement of powerlifting meets, they loved. And the same thing with strongman. We talked to Alan Thrall and Joey Zatmary, and they talked about how some of the aspects of not having super standardized equipment, not necessarily being able to warm up on anything approximating what you're actually going to work with, and just having to go out there and figure it out was somewhat part and parcel of the spirit of strongman, strongwoman. And I can understand that. And I think it's difficult to preserve the spirit of something while also trying to create structure and legitimize it. But there probably is some point where you can find the optimal balance of the two. For me, when you told me, hey, I'm a 2-time amateur world champion, and I turned pro early after that, my first thought was, hold on, if there's nothing higher than winning an amateur world championship, how does that not turn you pro? It's just, people decide that you've earned it. And I think that level of subjectivity is probably culturally valued in the sport of having earned your stripes or moving up in the community, which I get. But at the same time, I'm sure the sporting spirit or kind of that more regulated mindset of, hey, this is a hierarchical system. We've created this unique environment where it is like a meritocracy. How can I not be pro after I win a world championship at the amateur level multiple times? So I would just love to get your thoughts on that, and hopefully no one would listen to this who would then take away your pro status.
It was a mistake. It's like, oh.
There's a part of me, coming from the very standardized traditions of track and field now, that would love a standardized form of the sport. It's kind of fun sometimes. You can show up and the rule book says that the stone should be 16 pounds, and then you show up to the games and the stone is 18 and a half pounds. Well, you still got to throw the stone, and everybody throws the same stone, so it equals out on the day. The ranking boards don't look great, or the results don't look great, and that can be kind of fun. But at the same time, it would be kind of nice to know what you're getting into. So I'm very 50-50 on it. I enjoy showing up, or I know some games, like, this game I'm gonna have a big weight throw because their weight is really long and really tight, and it's a flyer. And then this other games I'm gonna have a terrible weight because it's just a block with a chain this long. So there's a fun aspect to it of just kind of showing up and everybody does their thing on that day. But with the background I have, there's also a part of me that's, let's standardize it. Let's make it more of a sport, make it a little more accessible to people who don't, have a group to go practice with or have the implements. It'd be really nice if you could just go on highlandgames.com and buy, weights. And there's some places that are starting to do that. I know, like, little shout out to Throw Bros. They started making, standardized weights. They started making standardized sheaths that you can just buy and order, and it ships right to your house. Started making hammers. So there's a little bit of a start to it, but it's still, it's still not required. A lot of games, they still use, the same implements that they've used for the last 20 years. Perfect example is actually over in Scotland. A majority of the games have the same implements they've used for 7,500 years. The exact same implement. It hasn't changed. So it's cool to be a part of that history. Like, yes, every single person that's competed at the games has touched that weight or that stone or that caber. Even in Scotland, they've somehow figured out a way to preserve cabers for 75 years. But there's a fun aspect to it. But sometimes showing up and knowing, well, today is going to be a terrible day in the hammer. They just have crappy hammers here. That can be kind of a not fun to have to work with. But
no, that totally makes sense. And it brings to mind some interesting things when I think about the history of some of the more standardized iron sports. So, for example, I think Olympic lifting, actually powerlifting, it's very obvious. Like, you pretty much, if you're an aficionado of equipped lifting, you cannot compare. Like, every 15 years, comparing the numbers makes no sense because you're going back to a period where, now single ply probably outperformed multiply from before, and so, like, you kind of have to only compare like the raw numbers in powerlifting. And even then, like, I don't know, are SBD sleeves and a belt really the same as back then? I mean, it's probably close enough. Then in Olympic lifting, you have a similar thing. So, for example, if you look back at the old numbers on clean and jerks and snatches, you have to remember, like, oh, were they really that much weaker back then? Or did the fact that they weren't allowed to have bar contact on the snatch and the clean, they didn't have rotating bars back then? Do you think that made a difference? Oh, I can tell you it absolutely did. So it puts those numbers in context, but it just kind of creates this overall sense of reverence, but you don't really know, like, what could, a John Grimmick do today, if he was allowed to brush his hips and the bar would rotate in his hands. What does that mean? And would the technique have changed? Like, Olympic lifters back then actually jumped forward, which is a big no-no. But if you can't touch the bar to your body, it's always going to be forward and you have to jump forward. So I think it's a nuanced discussion, and I totally understand where you're coming from. And it is pretty cool to be part of something that has those kind of historical roots. And you could argue that all sports have historical roots, of course, but I think it seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kyle, that the historical roots of Highland Games are a much more central feature of what the sport is about.
Yeah, the Highland Games is almost looked at as like um, like you're recreating, something that happened 3, 4, 500 years ago. They say the Highland Games was started by King Malcolm III of Scotland to find his best warriors. So we're all trying to emulate what he was doing back then, and the history of the Highland Games is a huge part of it. That's why we still wear kilts, because they wore kilts 500 years ago. And when it became a more well-known or more popularized sport in Scotland in like the 1800s, it was exactly that, to celebrate the Scottish heritage. Because when the Jacobites revolted in Scotland against the English, and then the English won, the English said, you can't wear any of your old Scottish garb, kilts are gone, you can't have these events, nothing. And that it was like that for like 30, 40, 50 years. Once that got repealed, then it was kilts and games and bagpipes, and they tried to celebrate what they thought they had lost for so long, and that's what it kind of is continuing to do today. I like to look at it as like a legitimate sport, almost like track and field, with that historical aspect to it. That's why if anyone ever said, well, why not just wear tights like a normal thrower would? Well, because that's not the games. If you want to throw shot put, go throw shot put. So the celebration of the sport is one of the more fun aspects of being a Highland Games competitor.
Kyle, I love that you went into that history, because Omar, and you know exactly what I'm talking about, the IPF boys, that's exactly the way they would look at this. Why wouldn't you just legitimize it? You're degrading yourself, etc. But I think if they understood that it's almost like asking someone who likes to reenact the Revolutionary War, why don't you guys just use M16s? They're far better than a musket.
Yeah.
It's like, well, that's not a Revolutionary War reenactment. And I think, I like, the folks I'm talking about, right, Omar?
Oh, yeah. But Eric, I was going to say, it's like we can also make that connection with other sports, though. In powerlifting, as an example, I get the idea of standardizing your outfit, the singlet, but it's like, do you need to wear a singlet? Like, really, if we want to talk about best equipment that you should be wearing, you want to wear it, obviously, so the judges can see what you're doing, da-da-da-da. It's like, but does wearing a kilt hamper in any way your performance? Is it not part of that rich tradition? And I think, if anything, hopefully some of the IPF boys and girls can see that they're trying to set up traditions, in the sport that they're doing. They're just a lot newer. And so I think in that quest, almost futile quest of optimization, where it's like specific, like, well, why don't we just got to standardize? We want to compare. It's like, we could talk even equipment when it comes to powerlifting. Like, let's say the knee sleeves, I would put forth that, let's say, SBD knee sleeves versus even raw powerlifting 20 years ago, where the neoprene, the millimeter, 7 millimeters, what have you, versus what they had before, even if it's 5 pounds, let's say at the highest level, let's say it scales, it's 1% of your total squat. Let's just say, hypothetically, so it's 1%, whatever. As it goes up, it's like, or the belt, the thickness, right? The SBD belt, the 13 millimeter lever belt that they have, it's like, that's a piece of equipment right there. They want to standardize, I think, certain things that they have to understand. There's more variability in life in general than maybe they're used to. And I think, if anything, the idea of tying it back, iron culture, history, science, culture, the historical and cultural standpoint of this, that there's an application where you said a king is looking for their best warriors. It's like, guess what? On the field of battle, it's not like, okay, so this stone I have, it's not 16 pounds. How am I supposed to fight the enemy if I don't have a 16-pound stone? It's like, you don't have those options, right? And so it's partaking in that rich history, much like strongman, where that's part of the fun on any given day. And I think the dynamic element sometimes gets lost in other strength sports, where on any given day, you don't truly know the competitors, also what condition they're going to show up in, because for strongman, I'm just using that as an example along with Highland Games, you don't know the athletes, the event you'll be doing. It's okay, I think this is going to be approximately like this, but we don't know. And there's a novelty to that, where it's a new experience then, where you're partaking in something that can't be repeated. And there's something in that uniqueness that might be lost, where it's like, oh, I go to this event, whatever. It's like kind of like going to McDonald's. Well, I know what the Big Mac's going to taste like versus going to like a mom and pop joint. It's like, but why would you use relish instead? Like we use this, it tastes so much better. It's like, well, that's how they do it and that's their tradition and it's something unique to partake in it. So no, look, the more we're talking about it, Eric, the more I'm in. The accessibility to me is the limiting factor. Where I heard, as an example, here in Toronto, after the Raptors won last year, they lost this year. It happens. But that basketball in the city is eclipsing rapidly the national sport. It's not technically our sport, but it is hockey. Where to get hockey gear now, it's like $500-$600 at the minimum, right? You need an ice rink. There's so many barriers. Basketball, dude, $20 ball. There's hoops all across the city. Anyone can play, and that's what gets popular. So I think making things more accessible will become important. But in my head, we talk about partaking right now, Kyle, in that rich history. The crossover that we all want to see would be the Highlander does the Highland Games, where there could only be one. And so we're picturing now like a mullet Kyle, Christopher Lambert, okay, having the kilt once again, Sean Connery saying, a Welshman saying, "Tell me of this land of Scotland, for I know not of its ways." And he's like, really, dude, that Christopher Lambert's actually from Luxembourg. Like you're way closer to Scotland than he is. But it's like, there could only be one where you fight then with a sword at the end. Dude, it's writing itself. This is ESPN Plus.
I mean, half the amateur games, the reward is some type of medieval weapon. So
that's what I'm saying.
If you win a sword, battling it out at the end of the day just kind of seems like the next logical step. I'm 100% for it.
Bro, I knew you'd be in it. Oh, look at it.
I've got one on my wall too.
Now, the irony of getting swords for winning natural bodybuilding shows is that you have to wait about 3 months of eating and putting body fat back on to actually be able to wield it without getting out of breath and passing out. So it's probably more appropriate for Highland Games, but I just want to say the most legitimate sport of all, bodybuilding, already uses swords. So if there's not precedent, if you don't have something to look up to try to aspire to becoming like our almost 100 federation strong sport of natural bodybuilding, then hey, if that's not going to sell it, then I don't know what will.
Oh, what's so amazing about that, Eric? It says McLeod on the hilt. I thought you were going to say, like, you have my sword, like when we're talking about the Highlander. Real quick to tie it back to everyone, Kyle, that might be listening, and again, they want to try and understand some of these things. Can you then talk what, as a throws coach, and let's say someone potentially interested in the Highland Games, what would your auxiliary training look like in the gym to assist then with the Highland Games? Because man, I am going to butcher this. I don't know what specific throw sport the guy came from, but recently, this is the tangent, there's that guy, my boy Johnny Candido, where he had a squat challenge. It was 405 high bar, and this is a chicken or the egg scenario. 405 on high bar, max reps. And there were 3 to 4 finalists. One of them, so we had a lot of powerlifters. We had this guy, Joe Sullivan, I think that took the cake. A lot of really great powerlifters obviously compete. But someone that finished in the top 3 to 4, and I think he would have been second. Again, butchering it a little bit, but it's basically right. But his depth it was supposed to be ATG, so ass to grass, and it was like below parallel, but not there. So that's how he got like DQ'd, but he was beastly strong, was a thrower. And so I'm not saying like chicken or the egg scenario. It's like, yeah, he's just a behemoth once again of an individual. So he's naturally predisposed to being amazing at everything when he touches the barbell. But what does it then look like for someone that wants to develop some of that power and explosiveness, their training or the skills that they would use in the gym to better help then throws?
Yeah. Like I said earlier, strength's not everything when it comes to throws, but it definitely helps a ton.
Yeah.
The stronger you are in certain aspects, you can handle some of these in pretty intense positions without one either getting hurt or one falling on your ass. So, the big three are, I'm not going to say always, important just because, like I said, I didn't deadlift until like a year ago. And the only reason I really started to deadlift was because the person that I was having write my programming prescribed it. So I was like, yeah, I guess I'll start doing it. But to me, the biggest thing is learning to be explosive. So Olympic lifts help that a lot. I do a lot of Olympic lifts without like the catch, so just the triple extension, the explosion, just moving things fast, and then just like your general athleticism, calisthenics, box jumps, single leg jumps. Recently, I started using a lot of strongman type stuff as one, conditioning, and two, moving weights in space, because that's all I do. So carries and stuff like that. They've recently started to help a lot more with body awareness, just because I'm getting stronger in different planes that I wasn't before, because I had never done strongman. But yeah, the biggest thing that I think any thrower needs is some base in some type of Olympic lift. It doesn't need to be a full clean, ass to grass pop up, a power clean, a pull, a high pull, a low pull. Just learning to move weight quickly is the most important thing, because the heaviest thing that we might touch on a field is, other than caber, would be 56 pounds. That's in the grand scheme of things, that's not heavy. But the more you can move, the faster you can move 100 pounds, the easier that 56 is gonna feel. So training quickly is probably the biggest thing, and that's one thing recently I've had to put back in my program, because I was training for strongman. I was trying to get stronger, and I felt myself getting slower, especially when I started practicing the Highland Games again. I felt myself a lot slower, so I had to take some time. My last cycle was speed bench, speed squat, power cleans, box jumps, trying to get that CNS moving and get some explosiveness back. So that would definitely be kind of your starting point. Your big three, and then just move your body and other implements quickly, for sure.
That's very interesting. I think, I've always wondered that, and that's something that's outside of my practical expertise, but not outside of my theoretical understanding of sports science. I mean, every movement has a power component, because that's just force times velocity. So the grindiest, slowest deadlift ever that takes 12 seconds, the force is high, and then the velocity is very low, but the power is something, Of course, it's not anywhere near the power production on a more moderate or light load, accelerated very quickly. But I think it's important to remember that, Olympic lifting, powerlifting, and throws are all kind of on a spectrum. The movement requirements are such that to complete them, some must be faster, right? So you can't do a snatch slowly. You have to generate acceleration to where it is actually, motionless in space, and then drop underneath it fast enough to catch it. And the strongest people in the world doing that shit with over 200 kilos. So likewise with powerlifting, if you hit zero velocity, you miss the lift. And I think throws are just interesting in that rather than trying to increase the load that you complete these movement standards, be, squat, bench, deadlift, or snatch and clean and jerk, the load is always the same, and you're just simply trying to move it with more power to get it further. So I think that's a very unique thing compared to what we typically think of as strength sports, and why I said, hey, maybe even we could call you a power athlete, because a lot of what you're working with are fixed loads. And I would say that's probably more true for most athletes, because they're moving their body through space. They're working with a fixed load all the time, but different demands. And we just had, not too long ago, our gymnastics episode. And we talked about how gymnastics is kind of the foundation or the base of everything in some sporting programs, and that there's, not a bad argument for that when you think about the basics of what gymnastics is, which is moving your body through space in different positions at different velocities, high forces, landings, absorbing force, creating force, stretch shortening cycles, the whole 9 yards. So I think it's always useful to get people outside of the world of strength sports on, like yourself, Kyle, because it opens the mind of people who are, I train for quote unquote strength, and what they really mean is I bench, squat, and deadlift, and I try to go as heavy as possible. When in reality, strength can be expressed in so many ways. And I think, if anything, powerlifting is probably one of the more narrow expressions of it in the grand scheme of athleticism.
Yeah, and throwing, the name of the game is acceleration. If you can't, the longer you can accelerate the implement, the further it's going to go. That's what happens. But that's why I say sometimes strength isn't always the best thing. Like, yeah, cool, I squatted 700 pounds. awesome. That was really cool for me. But if I have to go down to 400 pounds and it moves close to the same speed as that 700 pounds, I'm not going to throw far. If I need to be able to accelerate that lighter weight faster and faster and faster and faster to be able to throw far. So like that's why I say not, overall strength isn't the most important part. It can help, but having both facets of it, that's where you get those really, really elite throwers.
Totally makes sense.
You see some of the old, like the 80s shot putters, they're doing all kinds of crazy things like, running and doing single hops over super high hurdles right into, stair sprints and stuff like that. And they were also really strong, but they could, take their 300-pound body and, single hop over, high hurdles in succession. So that's why I say, strength isn't everything.
Absolutely not. And I think it's just really interesting to see kind of the culture of sport in different cultures. So in my experience, which is limited, of course, as I'm not an athlete who ever did throwing, but I was a barely still a sprinter as a 400-meter runner in high school. And looking back, I always wish I had become a thrower because I did not know what I would become later in life and what I would have liked. But most of the throwers in high school who were good, they got poached, or it was just the off season from football. They were the linemen, and they became throwers, and they got explosive, loved it, and some of them just totally converted. And I think in the States where football has such a big draw, it's kind of this thing where it's like, oh, we got a poach from there, but there's so many folks who aren't going to make it to the NFL who could still be very good throwers. And then it seems like there's another layer to that where then the throwers are getting poached into Highland games. So it's just kind of this interesting circuitous route where most times when I've talked to people, throwers were like a center or they were a lineman, and then they got into Highland games or strongman after doing that. So how often is that observation accurate? Is that pretty common, at least in the States?
100%. I was one of those kids. High school, I was football 100%, and I did track on the side because my football coach wanted me to do something in the spring. And even going into college, junior college, my first year, I played football, and I wasn't really planning on throwing, but injuries happened. I had 3 shoulder surgeries in 5 years of playing football, so after that third surgery, I was like, football's obviously not for me because I got glass shoulders. So I went back and talked to the track coach, and he let me walk on, and story's history from there. So it happens all the time, especially as a coach. I'm recruiting these kids. When I'm recruiting men, I hear probably 50-60% of the time that they're going to play football. That especially the biggest thing is sometimes talking to coaches. I'll talk to a high school coach. Well, he just wants to go to college to play football, or the parents, he wants to go play football. So that happens so much on the men's side of track and field that it can be a detriment to our sport sometimes. Some of there's been NFL players who have also been NCAA champions in the discus throw or the shot put or something like that. That if they had put their focus into the shot put, they might have been an Olympic champion or a world champion or a world record holder. But they never had that shot. Now, those examples made it to the NFL, so can't really, hark them for that, for making, $40 million a year. But
right.
The ones that, barely made a Division I team, maybe started for a Division I team and then didn't get drafted, didn't get picked up, and then their football career is over. They could have gone so much further in track if they had that path
instead of just getting a communications degree and 5 concussions.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Kyle, you're just saying exactly what we feel. Look, let's be honest. It's a critique of capitalism, where the love of the sport, they could go ahead and they could become one of the best throwers of all time, but then them dollar bills, $40 million, play NFL. They're like, all right, I'll do it. And so they trade their passion, like the song by Survivor, for glory. And that's what happens all too often. I will say that we've experienced that. We've seen it in powerlifting now, where former athletes kind of like, you have your career, so to speak, like football or what have you. And it's like, oh, what do I do after that? And a lot of the top champions clearly have either a direct athletic background or, they were sidelined, as you said, by injuries and then decided to pick it up. And it's taken kind of the sport as the pool has expanded the amount of people, amount of participants to the next level where we're seeing, Eric, numbers where we're like, what is going on here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, both we had Ellis McLean on along with Taylor Atwood, and they both got to the point where they were right on the cusp of getting a shot in the NFL. They were both too short, basically, was the story. Yeah. Which, I mean, one was a 93 and the other one's 74 world champ, so that doesn't surprise me at all. But they were the amount. I think the things they gained from that definitely are a huge part of why they're so successful in powerlifting. So it's interesting that strength sports, at least in the States, is kind of a receptacle for all the folks who didn't quite fit the mold, and not even necessarily for a lack of talent, but maybe anthropometrics, like we saw with Taylor and LS, or something like injury. There's not there. You can't necessarily say that some of the best NFL players would be even better than you as a thrower. Because while you might not have the shoulders for football, they might have not had something else for throwing. So I think it's interesting, and ultimately it's just a guessing game because we can't create an alternate reality where throwing is what we all watch every weekend in the States.
Or can we?
I could.
Yeah. The robots.
Devs. I mean, you get the draw of the NFL. It's on 3 days a week now in the States, and college football is on 1 to 2 days a week. High school football is 3 days a week. And then the league minimum for the NFL is like $450,000. So even if you're on the practice squad, you're making $450,000. There's a draw there that, any kid who's even interested in football is going to take over. If you could become a world champion. I mean, you might not make 80 grand doing it, but you can become a world champion. There's no draw on that.
Right.
For sure.
Yeah, and I guess what I wanted to follow up then, Kyle, where we're talking about all these different sports are getting poached by, from football. It's like, all right, I'll try this to throw to now Highland Games. Would you say that there's any unique qualities within the sport itself that you would say either give you an advantage when it comes to maybe either mindset? So just the skill acquisition or the practice or something that may be working with a diverse selection of throwers or seeing lifters in the gym where it's like, oh, this is something that maybe, they could stand to benefit from. As an example, when we had the gymnastics episode and we were talking about it and we're saying like, hey, here's what's going on. They were saying how both of our guests, how they're used to failing, how you have to, not only embrace that, but it's like, what are you going to do now? Well, you got to keep trying. It's like you're going for whatever this position, you might get it 1 time out of 20. And for a lot of people that go to the gym, they kind of want that treadmill of return where it's guaranteed I'm going to do this, then I'm going to get this output. So to not experience that, like you go for a PR and miss it, like you're going for a PR and missing it constantly. Well, why am I doing this in the first place then, right? Where there some of that grit maybe might be lost. So can you just talk maybe the mental aspect then of either the previous sports or in particular the Highland Games and maybe some of the unique qualities there?
Yeah, that's as you were talking, that's exactly what I was going to say is you have to be mentally strong. The throws, 9 times out of 10, you're probably going to fail. It's probably not going to go well, especially if you think about like practicing. If you're practicing at an elite level, you might be throwing, 30 to 50 times a day, 5 to 6 days a week. And, probably 80 to 90% of those throws are probably going to be bad throws, or at least, sub 80% of what you can do. Being able to fight through that and figure out what's going to get you that extra 1% or 2% or whatever you need to compete is hard. It's really tough. And if you're, the kind of person that, you have 3 bad throws and the game's over, this isn't going to be the sport for you. It's not going to work. Adam Nelson, who's one of the best shot putters in history, talked about his troubles with fouling throws. He fouled out of like something like 14 or 15 meets in a row, didn't get a legal throw. Ooh. As a professional, one of the best in the world. And having the mental, fortitude to get through all of that and then still, go out every day and get your throws in, go to the gym, just to know that it's probably not going to be a good one. But hey, if I do this one thing right, man, it's going to go. And then so work, you do it, finally it happens, then you get that relief. But that could be the next practice, that could be the next meet, that could be in 2 years from now. I tell my athletes all the time that when they have a PR, they have to celebrate it, no matter if it's a centimeter PR or a 2-foot PR, because realistically, you could never PR again. They could be a freshman in college, and realistically, hopefully if I do my job right and they do their job right, that doesn't happen. But realistically, in our sport, they could never hit a PR again. They could never throw further than that ever in their life. So, and it sucks to think about. It sucks. Like a perfect example for me is in the Highland Games. My lightweight for distance, I hit 88 feet as an amateur, 3 years ago, and my best since has been 86. I haven't gotten back up to that. Same with like the weight over bar. I hit 17.6 as an amateur, 3 years ago, that same year actually. And the best I've hit since then is 16.6. So, being able to get through all of that and deal with it and still try and come out on top is, you have to be mentally strong to be able to fight through all of that adversity.
Absolutely. I think that productive stubbornness, that singular focus on a sometimes monotonous and frustrating task in order to improve has a lot of applications to life. And I think it's something that if you're paying attention to the iron culture, it's something we've brought up in damn near 80% of our episodes, and it's really important. And it's not that you can't get this out of normal sports, quote unquote normal sports like team sports, but I think team sports emphasize a little more of camaraderie, teamwork, also very important values, but slightly different values that transfer to the rest of life. If I've talked to athletes, I've even made this joke myself, because I think anyone in the strength circle knows that our sports are a little silly and strange, and you've got to be a little self-deprecating. But many athletes have said things like, hey, your sport is my sport's training. Like that's what I do for S&C on Monday and Wednesday. But I think if you were really honest, most people who get into, like, I remember playing basketball, and I wasn't very good, but I did play some rec league when I was a teenager. I loved basketball. I didn't train for basketball. It was something that I did for fun. And that's what kept me on the court. And when it stopped being fun, I stopped playing. But that is absolutely not the mentality that I think you need for a sport that is training. You have to be willing to put your nose to the grindstone and be really, really comfortable with delayed gratification, and eventually even just fall in love with the process, because like I said, there may not be that delayed gratification as far as an outcome. Kyle, like you said, it may be your last PR. It may be the furthest you ever throw, and you may have to adapt. I think that's what's kind of cool about strongman and Highland Games specifically, is they're multi-event, multi-discipline, multi-athletic characteristic sports that have far more to do with what happens on the day and finding out a way to tactically come out on top than necessarily are you actually in a better place of physical preparedness than you were at some point on this event 3 years ago. When we had Joey Zatmary and Alan Thrall on, they were like, it's on the day, it's really about winning the meet or winning the show. The strongman competition. I imagine it's the same with Highland Games. And just so people understand what I'm talking about, let's say you've got 5 events and one of them is deadlift for reps, and you could have done 11, but 7 would put you in first. I think the average powerlifter with the mentality we have, and even the average athlete in general, be like, well, I want to do 11. I'm not going to leave 4 reps in the tank. But then you got to go do stones afterwards, and then you got to do farmer's walk. You telling me you're not going to preserve your grip and your back for the other 2 events, which I think is why strongman and Highland Games are quite interesting, because they're good spectator sports, and they're engaging, and they keep you involved as an athlete and as a spectator, because it is about of what happens in that environment. There's going to be wind, there's going to be a different turf. Like you said, you're going to have a bad throwing implement or a good throwing implement. What's going to happen on the day? How did the event prior and afterward go? And I remember I was watching a strongman competition where they had to go to the judges table and do all these calculations to figure out who actually won. There's this sense of waiting. And in powerlifting, once that last deadlift goes, you know who won. you know? So I think it's really intriguing. It means almost nothing to win a local powerlifting meet, but it can mean a lot to win a local strongman or Highland Games competition, because it speaks to your ability to face that adversity in the moment and overcome competitors in a little more of a direct manner.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I like about Highland Games. In track and field, yes, at the higher levels, or the championship levels, yeah, it's all about winning on the day, But overall, as like in the college level, if you're not at that top level, you're not going to win meets. It's all about PRs, right? It's all about how far can I throw on the day. Whereas like Highland Games, it is very much how far I can throw on the day, given the weather, the grass, the implement, and sometimes you do your best and someone comes up behind you and still takes you over. So, a great example of the throwing, or for what you were talking about with throwing, is in the Highland Games, every throw you are trying to PR. You can't take off a throw, because if you do, it's not just going to be 2 feet less than your PR, it's going to be 30 feet less than your PR, and that's going to be, you're going to go from second to last. So you can't take off in a throw. But as far as like part of the strategy with the Highland Games, if you win an event, you get 3 extra throws, and you can take those throws if you want to try and get a PR, you want to try and break a field record, you want to try and break a world record. If you win an event, you get 3 extra throws. And a lot of times, part of the strategy, you don't take those throws, even though my last throw was 6 inches off of the field record, and I get an extra $100 if I break that field record. But I've got 6 more events to do, and 3 more throws in this one event could really hurt my next event. So sometimes, yeah, you do have to play strategy there, or taking extra, taking attempts in like the lightweight or the weight over bar. I mean, sometimes you just kind of gotta accept that, okay, I got 15 feet, that's gonna get me 3rd place. I've got caber, I'm really tired, I'm gonna bow out and not take an attempt at 16. And that can be a big ego shot, especially if your PR is really, really high. But you do have to have a little bit of strategy of it, not quite as much as like powerlifting or strongman or something like that, but you do have to strategize that a little bit.
Totally makes sense. And that's an interesting aspect that I didn't even know. I think our listeners will be really interested to hear that you get additional attempts if you won one of the events. That's really interesting. I think on that note, obviously Omar and I don't know what we don't know. So are there other unique aspects of Highland Games that that you think people would either be interested to learn about, should know about to understand more about the kind of the format of the sport, or other aspects like that? Because that's pretty cool.
Not that I can think of. I mean, it also kind of varies place to place. Like example that kind of blew my mind when I went over to Scotland, the difference in the way that we run games in the States versus the way they run it in Scotland was the caber. In the States, you get 3 attempts in the caber. If you hit at 12 o'clock, which is considered a perfect score, and the next person hits at 12 o'clock, you have 2 more attempts. And if you hit at 12 o'clock again, they hit at 1 o'clock, then you win. In Scotland, if you hit at 12 o'clock, that's the best you can do. So you can't hit 2 12s isn't a thing. You can hit it, but it doesn't help you in the long run. So in Scotland, if you hit at 12 o'clock, you go sit down and take your shoes off, you're done. Whereas here, you hit at 12 o'clock and then you sit and wait, okay, who else is going to hit at 12? Do I have to go again? He hit at 12. All right, game up, go again, So that's one interesting aspect. But another one it would be like the weight over bar. In the States, a lot of the times we have a fixed bar, kind of like a lot of the strongman events where, it's fixed to the standards. If it hits and rolls over, it's still good. Whereas in some games in the States, but mostly in Scotland, it's a knockoff bar, kind of like the pole vault or the high drop.
Yep.
So if it hits the bar, you're done. Like that doesn't count. Doesn't matter if it went 2 feet above the bar and then came back down on it. It doesn't count. So those are just some little nuances that you can take into account there. But overall, like I said, it's game to game.
Very cool. Yeah, I think we're at this point. I think, Omar, anything else that we want to cover would probably just take away from the beauty that this episode was and the rich kind of learnings that we've had. So we just want to open it up to you, Kyle, if you have any closing words that you want to say about throwing or Highland Games. And if not, we just love if people want to learn more about this stuff, where can they find you? Where can they follow your career as an athlete and coach? And anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I just think anyone who's interested in strength sports in general should, like I think I said this earlier, should give the Highland Games a try. Exposure for the sport is what's going to keep it going. A lot of games were hit really, really hard this year because majority of the funding for this games comes from ticket sales and stuff from the festival the year prior. So not having a season this year has really hurt a lot of games. Even some of the bigger, professional games that, you kind of think are kind of untouchable. They're really hurting. I know that the Celtic Classic in Pennsylvania is the U.S. championship for the pros, and it's a free event to go to, but they're struggling just not having a games this year. So I encourage anyone that is remotely interested to either compete or go watch or just support the athletes that are trying to do it at any level. It doesn't matter if it's novice to amateur to professional to men to women. Doesn't matter. Go support. Go out, and if you want to give it a shot, give it a shot. That's the only thing that's going to keep this little niche sport going. If you want to find me, you can find me on Instagram at FlowerPowerHG. Little pun off my last name there. And if you're interested in getting to know more about me as a coach, I do have an Instagram for my coaching. It's called Hornet Throws for the Sacramento State Hornets. Those two, Instagram, really the only places you can find me. I am on Facebook, but I kind of try and keep that personal. So, yeah.
Absolutely awesome. Well, I think, Kyle, you've been an excellent ambassador for both the disciplines of throws and the Highland Games. I know our listeners have learned a ton, and we just want to thank you for being on and sharing that information with our audience. And with that, Omar, I'm going to pass the baton, or just throw it at you, which I heard is what you actually do in track and field, to take from there.
Yeah, no, we will make sure, Kyle, to link all your social media in the description. This, I think, has been an excellent episode. Just slowly expanding, once again, the iron culture, uniting it. And when people think, what's functional? It's like, what's more functional than throwing a stone at your enemy? So, I mean, and we don't know when that's going to be useful again, folks. And I will just propose that when I come back down to Sacramento, we're going to get some lifting in. And I'm going to propose that we're going to come up with a new event, Kyle, and it's going to be called the Thrall Throw, which is how far we could throw Allen. I'm betting on at least 3 to 5 feet for myself. You're probably at 10 to 15. Depends on, how long his beard is at that time and like what we could really use for leverage, but we'll find out.
No, yeah, I'm definitely going to start practicing. I'm going to text Alan right now and say, meet me at the gym. We got some things to do. So I'll be ready for that for sure.
Yeah, he'll be like, hey man, what's up? And you just like hoist him like, yeah, like just throw him like, that was about 8 feet. Okay, here we go. But we'll link all the social media in the description. We want to thank all the listeners for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, you can help us out by leaving a rating and review on iTunes. If you're on YouTube, go ahead and leave us a comment. We'll do our best to respond. We're back every single Monday from now till the next, several thousand years. We'll catch you then.